The Berlin Wall fell 35 years ago this week. To celebrate, we've cobbled together a few stories from the history of East German football. First off, what better way than to celebrate East Germany's one appearance at the World Cup in 1974? Then we'll take a look at each of the nation's three European finalists before the civil war of BFC Dynamo and Dynamo Dresden that took place in the 1980s. This is Behind the Wall, Tales from East Germany. What better way to start an anthology about East Germany than with their only international tournament endeavour? East Germany were admitted into the FIFA and UEFA in the 50s before the Berlin Wall was even built, yet the IOC were reticent to do the same. Both sides decided to compete in a playoff to determine the German representative at each Summer Olympics. Finally, in 1964, East Germany beat their neighbours to the Games and won bronze in Tokyo. 8 years later, the pair were bound to one another yet again at the Munich Olympics. A counter-attacking masterclass saw the East dispatch of the West as they won bronze yet again. All this despite football being effectively in the relegation of sports funded by the DDR. They preferred Olympic sports to push their soft power onto the world. Plus, being good at football was really, really hard. Just look at West Germany. They needed an actual miracle in Bern to win a trophy before 1972. So it shouldn't be surprising that East Germany, a much smaller, underfunded nation, stumbled at hurdle after hurdle to reach the tournament. Until November the 13th, 1973, when East Germany put away Albania 4-1 to qualify for the upcoming World Cup, fittingly held over the wall in West Germany. 7 weeks later, some 11-year-old dweeb called Detlef Langer decided to be a little gobshite and pair off the two Germans at the draw. Instantly, every German's eyes were pinned to the final group match encounter on June the 22nd at the Volkspark Stadion in Hamburg. Certainly it was all set to be one of the more politically charged contests, hardly helped by Bild printing East Germany's name with inverted commas in the build-up. The East Germans were hopping over the wall to make a fist of it though. They'd come off the back of a 13-match unbeaten run. One of their clubs had just lifted European silverware, and in Bernd Branch, Joachim Streich, Jürgen Sparwasser and Jürgen Kroy, a band of players who could be competitive. They needed a second-half own goal to get them on their way against Australia in Hamburg before a limp draw at the Olympiastadion, which looked like a horrendous result against Chile. But then the South Americans failed to break down Australia at that same stadium 4 days later. Preparing for the biggest match in East German football, at least the sporting pressure had been taken away from them, as their qualification had been confirmed. All that was left to be decided was German pride on top of the group, which could have had massive implications going forward. Being the second group to finish, the only semi-final group teams they knew for sure were Brazil and Yugoslavia. Whoever won the group would meet the former, and likely Netherlands too, so maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing not to win the match they were calling the Bruderduel. Pride in winning a World Cup match and pride in being a footballer would in no doubt have taken over, yet the first half was sloppy with an absent Gerd Müller, as his teammates weren't much better behind him. East Germany weren't exactly hanging on, but living relatively comfortably. Franz Beckenbauer told his players to go for the kill with 20 minutes left. By this point, he was effectively the coach anyway, as Helmut Schön disappeared further and further into the background. Schön, a man born in Dresden in 1915, wanted to win this game more than most. But on 77 minutes came the goal that ensured he wouldn't. West Germany were attempting to go for that kill when the East broke, Sparwasser beating substitute Horst-Dieter Höttges for pace before squirming the ball beyond Sepp Maier. And the pair would never meet again, East Germany forever holding that 100% record over their neighbours. Of course, the win left East Germany with one of the most uphill groups in World Cup history, Brazil, Argentina and Netherlands, which the latter wound up winning before losing in the final to the hosts. East Germany didn't disgrace themselves, only going down to Brazil by a goal, to Netherlands by 2, and getting a point out of a lacklustre Argentina. Ranked officially 6th out of 16 teams, the GDR essentially ran out of ideas and steam when more technical teams were placed in front of them. They would never be back, going almightily close to qualifying for the Euros in both 1980 and 88, but they did scoop further Olympic medals, gold in Montreal and silver in Moscow. Now back to the club we hinted at the last part of the video. Magdeburg were formed out of the ashes of a few pre-war clubs and, as was tradition, renamed to within an inch of their lives over the next decade. The club was fortunate that it was one of the hand-picked performance centres by the government, and so they effectively had the pick of the nearby best players. And once Hans Krugel stepped into the role of coach, Magdeburg gained more power, winning the league in 72 and following that up with the cup a year later, granting them access to the Cup Winners' Cup for the 73-74 season. When they pitched up at De Kuip to face NEC Breda on September the 19th, there would have been nobody on earth who expected them to play at the same stadium when the final of the competition rolled back around on May the 8th. They kept the Dutch at bay before a quick-fire double salvo either side of the hour mark back on home soil confirmed Magdeburg's progression to the last 16. Bannico Strava were next pulled out of the hat. Goals either side of the break left Magdeburg's slender European dream seemingly snuffed out. A 2-goal deficit to make up on the other side of the wall was going to be tough. Half an hour in, they won and converted a penalty through Wolfgang Abraham, setting up a grandstand finish. This tie would need the full allotted 2 hours, and Martin Hofmann added to his Cup Winners' Cup tally with 6 minutes to spare, and that man, Jürgen Sparwasser, became the hero on 104 minutes. A dramatic turnaround. Magdeburg could now feel confident going into the spring, especially once the draw pulled out Bulgarians Berostar as Zagoa. Yeah, fair enough if you've never heard of them, but they were just fresh off dispatching of Athletic Club. A tricky home first leg was made infinitely more comfortable with 2 goals in the last 20 minutes from Hans-Jürgen Hermann and Sigrid Muse. A trip to Bulgaria was never going to hold that same serenity. East Germany were twitching when Ivan Vutov converted a penalty 18 minutes from time, but a truly invaluable away goal, Magdeburg's first of the season, via Hans-Jürgen Hermann, booked Magdeburg's spot in the semi-final. They now had entered uncharted waters. Back in '66, they had lost to the eventual champions West Ham United at the same stage. 8 years later, maybe they were the eventual champions. Sporting were next. Before the first leg, Magdeburg toasted another Oberliga 1 and they were flying even higher when Jürgen Sparwasser contributed another goal on 62 minutes. The unfathomable lead, however, would last just 14 minutes. Magdeburg returned home from Lisbon with an away goals advantage. It certainly placed a new pressure on the East Germans, who presumably didn't feel a whiff of it, as Jürgen Pomerenke netted after 9 minutes before the now prolific Sparwasser added a second on 70 minutes. They wouldn't let another tie die in peace, as Marino's late goal set up a grandstand finish, but they had just about enough resolve to book their return to Rotterdam. Waiting for them in front of just 4,641 souls were Milan. Milan, led by Giovanni Trapattoni, who was in interim charge of the club he used to play for, coaching several survivors that he played alongside from the 1969 European Cup final. Magdeburg had yet to lose in 74, but they had their league season wrapped up well in advance of the final, so could be forgiven for being slightly rusty. Not a bit of it. They swarmed all over Milan and netted on 42 minutes when Enrico Lanzi diverted a cross beyond his own keeper. If that didn't kill Milan's spirit, a second goal bagged on 74 minutes through Wolfgang Seguin did. The brutal fact is, it was coming, and Magdeburg were vastly the superior team. Destroying tradition, Magdeburg were unable to compete in the Super Cup given it was against Bayern, but they couldn't be kept apart for too long. Bayern, after all, beat them in their second European Cup winning campaign in November. Heinz Krugel, who had led Magdeburg to the incredible European triumph as well as 3 leagues and 2 cups, left East German football behind in 1976 when his card was marked by the Stasi. He refused to capitalise on their snooping of the Bayern Munich team in that European Cup game and was quietly let go, never to return to football. Magdeburg never won the league again after he left. Magdeburg perhaps suffered the greatest fall from grace when reunification took place in the early 90s. They were demoted into the obscurity of the German regional league system, only returning to the second tier in 2018. Magdeburg became the first East German club to win a European final, but would they be the last? But before we answer that, I need to tell you about how I watch every single Premier League match completely legally, which means it's VPN time! A VPN hides your IP address, which lets you safeguard your internet connection. So, The absolute opposite of what the Manchester United defence would do. Am I right? No? Okay. And for those who haven't skipped this YouTube advert because you bloody love a bargain, here's why you should choose private internet access, today's video sponsor. 1. They're offering you an insane 83% VPN discounts and 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 months completely free. See it like Manchester City buying Citigroup players for a knockdown price. 2. You can protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Chelsea's transfer strategy for 1. You want 783 devices protected? Just buy them all up and protect them. 3. You can access region-restricted content from all over the world 365 days a year. Good news for Spurs fans whose passports are usually back in that cupboard by December. That is private internet access. Links to the discount in the description. Carl Zeiss Jena had touched down into the Oberliga for the first time in 1952 and after 10 years of yo-yoing found themselves deep into European action through the Cup Winners' Cup. They benefited from a name change in 1966 and from governmental backing as one of the DDR focus centres. Within 2 years they had won their second Oberliga title and by 1971 were readily competing in the European Cup's latter stages, losing in the quarter-final to Red Star Belgrade. The marvellous and ridiculous 1980-81 Cup Winners' Cup campaign featured the beasts of Celtic, Benfica, Feyenoord, all former European champions. Also Roma, Valencia and West Ham, successful European clubs of the past. And then there was Carl Zeiss Jena, seemingly only there for a good time, not a long time, particularly when they were handed a trip to the Olimpico and walked away wounded with a 3-0 defeat. The timid Carl Zeiss Jena of Rome became the vengeful, confident stars in front of their own fans in the Erst Haber Sportfeld. Andreas Krause and Lutz Lindemann made the tie interesting in the first half before another Andreas, Bilal, got not only the third goal to tie things up but an 87th minute winner. One of the all-time insane European ties. One of the beasts were out of the competition and plucky old Carl Zeiss Jena had slain them. Just as Magdeburg had gotten the luck of the draw in the same competition 7 years prior, Carl Zeiss Jena received absolutely none of that, rewarded with a trip to the reigning holders, Valencia. That home field confidence shone through once again as Valencia crumbled in the first half an hour, shipping 3 goals. The one thing making the Mestalla return interesting, however, was a Fernando Morena away goal in the second half. Carl Zeiss Jena were now surely going to be fed to the Wolves back in Spain and bow out. In a nerve-shredding contest, Valencia could manage just 1 goal, and Carl Zeiss Jena had defeated another beast. Quarter-final, and with a more concentrated talent pool, just who would be the next to line up against the East German underdog? Yes, you guessed it correctly. The English 3rd Division outfit Newport County, only in the competition because they were still allowed to play in the Welsh Cup. Newport, who had been a 4th Division team only months ago and finished beneath Exeter City in 1981, and yet they wound up giving Carl Zeiss Jena their toughest task yet. And that was without their star striker, John Aldridge. Even with all those odds stacked against them, when teams like Roma had conceded 4 and Valencia and 3 in Jena, Newport went behind the wall and got themselves a 2-2 draw on an absolute bog of a pitch thanks to a Tommy Tynan double. Carl Zeiss Jena had to break the habit of a lifetime and win away from home in Europe. Now what? And they did so again, scabbing a 1-0 win at Somerton Park thanks to Lothar Kurbowite's free kick. They were battered from pillar to post, had half their team out and just about escaped South Wales with a win. Benfica were next. From a team struggling to stay in the 3rd tier of English football to a multiple-time European champion. Faced with another home leg, Carl Zeiss Jena this time took the initiative and kept it. 2 goals in the first 15 minutes, but Lisbon was going to be a different prospect to Newport, obviously. Whilst they conceded, it was just the once to Reynaldo in the 59th minute. Carl Zeiss Jena inexplicably were through to a European final. Perhaps even more inexplicable was the fact that they had been meeting Dynamo Tbilisi in Dusseldorf, not Feyenoord. But Tbilisi had rattled their way through the competition, humbling West Ham 4-1 at Upton Park in the quarter-finals. They were the dictionary definition of a crack Eastern European outfit. If there was ever an attendance not suited to a game, it was this one. 4,750 occupied the suddenly cavernous Rheinstadion, and half of those attendees were handed free tickets from local primary schools. Jena were well organised in their man-to-man marking, and Dynamo's counter-attacking was stupendous, their directness ultimately savaging the East Germans. But it wasn't until Jena got on the board via the only member of their squad not to own an English Wikipedia page, Gerhard Hopper, on 63 minutes. Yet within 4 minutes the sides were level, and equipped with momentum, there would be only one winner, as Vladimir Gutsaev's goal was added to by Vitaly Daraselia. A game that deserved more people in attendance, a game befitting of a UEFA final, but ultimately neither side would be back. At the time of publication, Carl Zeiss Jena are in the Regionalliga Nordost, that's 4th tier to me and you, and they trail the current league leaders Lokomotive Leipzig. Speaking of which, we're taking a quick jaunt to Leipzig, but with none of this energy drink bullshit. But then again, judging by the name Lokomotive Leipzig, they were backed by something quick themselves. And they would hold the distinction to be the final East German team to reach a UEFA final. They can be described as the epitome of German football in history, becoming the first official German champions in 1903 under the guise of VfB Leipzig. That golden era was a long time ago, and now Lokomotive were packed away behind the Berlin Wall, hence the new name, Lokomotive. Of all the teams to have made an imprint on the European game, Carl Zeiss Jena, Dynamo Dresden, Vorwärts Berlin, BFC Dynamo, Hansa Rostock and Magdeburg, Lokomotive Leipzig somehow never won the Oberliga. They had to make do with the Pokal, and did so quite prolifically, winning it 4 times between 1976 and 87. They were often the Leipzig representative in the Fairs Cup and did nothing. Their moments in the sun only brief, a UEFA Cup semi-final against Tottenham Hotspur in 74 and a Cup Winners' Cup quarter-final against Barca in 82. They started things off how they did in their prior European campaign in Northern Ireland, and similarly took a 1-1 draw back home and produced victory. Only this time it was thanks to a last-gasp Hans Richter goal. The second round wasn't any easier, with another away draw, this time in Vienna against Rapid. Back at the Zentralstadion, Lokomotive needed another late Richter goal, but this time to plunge the game into extra time. And it was all set to go all the way to penalties until Hans-Jörg Leitzke stole the win 2 minutes from time. The quarter-finals meant FC Sion and a 2-0 aggregate victory, which all seems quite cushy, nice and a roaring fireplace whilst it's raining outside. Yet they scrambled the 2-goal win at home in the final minutes thanks to Olaf Marschall and, of course, Hans Richter, and just about held off their opponents in Switzerland. After 3 draws on the road, Lokomotive travelled to Bordeaux in a crunch semi-final. Finally, they saved a result for the most important time when Uwe Bredov headed home in the second half. Smash and grab, they welcomed the French side to Leipzig 14 days later with a rare aggregate lead. Yet this was a Bordeaux team containing John Tigana, Patrick Battiston and Bernard Lacombe. They were still vast favourites to join either Ajax or Real Zaragoza in Athens for the final. It took just 3 minutes for Zlatko Vujovic to level up the aggregate scores in front of a boisterous 73,000 East Germans. Everything seemed to be all set for a Bordeaux whitewash, and yet Lokomotive clung on in there for 117 minutes, which means it's penalty time. And I should probably pad out the stereotypes of Germans winning penalty shootouts, and of course, they complied. Zoran Vujovic, the reason why Bordeaux were even still in the competition, the cruel victim of the shootout, and typically, the Germans weren't about to pass up this opportunity in sudden death from 12 yards. René Müller dispatched the kick to send Lokomotive to Athens. And let's get it right, they were heroes and legends for merely getting this far. Whilst their run to the final might not have been littered by the landmines that Carl Zeiss Jena suffered from, they ultimately deserved to be there. In the final, though, waiting for them was a Johan Cruyff Ajax team stuffed full of Rijkaards, Van Bastens and Bergkamps. Van Basten it was who grabbed the goal, and whilst Lokomotive Leipzig were the epitome of a collective unit from behind the Iron Curtain, they simply just didn't have enough quality when it came to the final act. Reunified German football was right around the corner, and whilst Lokomotive earned their place in the second tier and dabbled a little bit in the Bundesliga, they had gone bankrupt by 2004. And we end the video with the small matter of East Germany's biggest domestic story, when BFC Dynamo left everyone for dust in the 1980s. Before that, let's puke out a history lesson. 1954, Dynamo Dresden's players were forced to move to BFC, and 3 years later, some pudgy little fucker called Erich Milke became head of the Stasi. BFC was Milke's club, and quickly and probably quite predictably, they were instantly promoted and occupied the upper echelons of the Oberliga. Then all those players they stole from Dresden began to age. BFC didn't quite replace them well enough and were relegated back in 1967. After probably quite a short, sharp meeting, BFC were back able to rejuvenate their squad, gaining promotion instantly. Once they were back in the top flight, they'd grab teams like Vorwärts Berlin, aka the Army team, uproot their entire club, move it elsewhere, and then pick off their best youth talent. And still, there wasn't success to be had domestically, which begs the question, if you're a football club run by the Secret Service, why don't you just do a load of shady shit? Between 71 and 78, all the league titles went to Magdeburg or Dynamo Dresden, and it was the latter that was the biggest threat in East German football. By this point, Milke was just about sick of it. BFC was the club he supported, and he would stop at nothing to make them successful. He would go on to hire 170,000 Stasi informants, many of them in football. Before in a more grisly scene, they were almost certainly involved in killing Lutz Eigendorf after he defected from BFC, so he could play over the wall in the Bundesliga. The sands shifted in the summer of 1978 when Erich Milke turned up to Dynamo Dresden's dressing room. He told them it was now BFC's turn to win. Simply put, they did, again and again, for 10 years in a row, which is still not as much as Bayern Munich's most recent championship streak. BFC, however, were dirty. If they needed a penalty, they'd get one. Referees knew that the Stasi would decide if they were up to what was effectively a promotion by nominating them for UEFA competitions, so the refs had no other options. And whilst BFC probably had the best litter of players around this time, it's because they stole quite a lot of them and concentrated power so finely into Berlin that they couldn't help but win. Dresden player, and it's not easy for me to say this, Ralf Minge, even though it's probably pronounced Ralf Minge, admitted they undoubtedly had a top team. But then there's the probable truthful accusations of rampant doping at the club. Also, if a referee couldn't see fit to award a penalty, they'd simply play next goal winner like it was the Year 5, Year 6 Classico and tot up as much time as they could. 1986 saw the most obvious and egregious decision go BFC's way when a BFC player crumbled underneath the weight of sheer air on 95 minutes against Lokomotive Leipzig. Penalty awarded and dispatched, radio commentary couldn't help but instinctively yelp, "This cannot be happening." And after that, you fear for him and his family, you really do. But even BFC player Rainer Erst said, when you saw many of the decisions that went our way, you did begin to question things. Yeah, no shit, mate. They would become known as Die Scheibermeister, the cheating champions, and in a scene quite like the modern maelstrom of social media bullshit from fans today, BFC fans just stood ignorant to it all, armed with enough cognitive dissonance to kill a country, and they would chant, "Grandpa was in the SS, Dad was in the Stasi, and I'm with BFC," which is almost as bad as this banner. They won 10 titles in a row, including one undefeated season, and yet they couldn't do anything in European competition as it was outside of Stasi boundaries. Their 2 European Cup quarter-finals in the 1980s equalled Dynamo Dresden's efforts from the prior decade. And it was Dresden who ended their dominance in 1989 and 90 as Germany prepared to reunite. BFC now play in the Regional Liga Nordost, with Dynamo Dresden above them in the 3rd tier. Let's take a trip back over the wall though and remind ourselves of the forgotten European champions, Hamburger SV.